Hello once again, and welcome back to my Final Fantasy series retrospective. This is part 3 in the series, covering the PS1 games Final Fantasies 7 through 9, and if you haven't already, I would highly recommend and appreciate you going back and watching the first two parts that cover games 1 through 6, as I will be making some references to those in this video. To sum it up, I recently completed every mainline Final Fantasy game, and I wanted to share my thoughts on each game and the series as a whole, analyzing it as it progressed. The PlayStation was a real game changer for Squaresoft. The console's use of discs allowed developers to make games pretty much as big as they wanted, as they could just load more data on the next included disc. There were no more size restrictions on games, and Square used this more than maybe anybody. The graphical improvements their games showed were unrivaled at the time, having massive 3D environments and FMVs for more engaging storytelling. In what many considered to be the company's golden age, this period saw the company releasing many all-time classics, including Xenogears, Parasite Eve, Chrono Cross, but above even those, and the defining parts of the catalog, were the Final Fantasy entries, particularly 7. The series stayed true to its roots, however, and continued to push the boundaries of what was possible at the time for turn-based games, finding new ways to reinvent themselves and revisiting old ideas to keep moving forward. I've mentioned it previously, but I played what I deemed was the best or most convenient overall version of each game, and I used speed-ups and save states, guides, or walkthroughs wherever I needed them, because I wanted to get the best possible experience and to encounter as much of each game as I could. The footage here is not my initial playthroughs and was recorded afterwards, so you'll see me using cheats and other boosts to breeze through the games quicker to record certain scenes, so please ignore it if it looks stupid or out of place. That's not how my actual playthrough went. Now, let's continue our analysis of the franchise and see what the big deal is about the PS1 entries, starting with Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is a game that really doesn't need an introduction at this point. It's widely considered one of the best games of all time, and is seen as part of the golden standard for RPGs. They managed to break through in the West, becoming a massive hit, and being many people's first and only turn-based game that they would really get into. The game spawned its own franchise with multiple games, a film, and a divisive yet successful and highly anticipated remake trilogy. For many people, Final Fantasy VII is the face of the franchise as a whole, and is the de facto game. My background with this entry was moderate. Going into the game, I already knew most of the major story beats and twists, and I'm what most people would consider a contrarian, so knowing its legacy, I had anticipated enjoying the game, mostly because I liked the last two so much, but also to disavow the masterpiece status that it had earned. However, I am happy to say that I was completely wrong, and that Final Fantasy VII is a truly one-of-a-kind experience. For this game, I played the notoriously terrible PC port, which for some reason hasn't been updated from its original release in 1997. So I used the Satsuki Yatoshi mod for cleaner backgrounds, and the Reunion mod for much more accurate translation, and also little bonuses like speed up and stuff like that. Gameplay in FF7 sticks to the formula pretty closely once again, and it keeps the core generally the same, only adding some minor changes in systems. The active party count has been dropped to 3, which I'm not a fan of, since it limits the options you have in each moment during combat, but it's rarely a big issue in this game, as all the encounters are fairly well balanced around that new party size. The ATB meter returns, and characters have their own specific classes once again. The big mechanic this entry adds is the materia system. Materia turns all actions beyond the basic attack and item into equipable orbs. Green materia is for spells, yellow is for commands, red for summons, pink for support and automatic abilities, and blue for enhancements, linking to other materia for some bonus attributes like elemental resistances or multi-hit spells. Materia usage is dictated by the number and type of slots from each character's equipment, and materia can be moved around freely between all party members. It also gains its own XP and levels up through the combat, growing stronger and unlocking new abilities. This system gives a ton of freedom to how you build your party, as you can now flexibly move your setup from one character to another as the scenario requires. Want to use Yuffie but you don't like the thief skill or stealing? Just take it off and give her something else. Make her into a battle mage if you want. The sky is pretty much the limit. The other big addition to combat in this game are limit breaks, a character's super move. Every character, with the exception of Cait Sith, gets 7 different limit breaks. While most are just different ways to deal a lot of damage, some limit breaks are utilities, like Yuffie's Clear Tranquil, which heals the party, or any one of Aerith's that can do any sort of support ability. You unlock more limits by either killing so many enemies or using the previous limit a certain number of times. Limits are charged through taking damage, so the longer a battle goes on, the more likely you'll be able to use it as a nice comeback mechanic in the fight. While not the most significant change, I think they're a nice way to spice up the combat and add an extra layer of strategy. The only real problem I have with them is that once your limit is ready, it replaces your attack command, meaning you no longer can do your basic physical attack until you use the limit. This really restricts your available choices, as you may not want to spend MP from using spells at the moment, so you're essentially forced to use the limit break, possibly wasting it. The combat and exploration aren't the only highlights of the gameplay, however. In a very PS1 era fashion, FF7 is chock full of minigames. Chocobo racing, submarine chases, tower defense games, snowboarding, motorcycle races, and many more. A few of these are required in short segments for story progression, but the vast majority of them are optional. My personal favorite of the bunch is the dolphin jump, because it lasts 5 seconds and has absolutely no reason to exist beyond just being silly. I mean, like, look at this thing. That's literally it. You just get flipped by the dolphin. Why is that even here? Despite the few negatives that I bring up, I think FF7 has the second most enjoyable gameplay moment to moment, only being beat out by FF5 and its extensive job system. But it's a pretty close second, and playing this game is a ton of fun. I've mentioned before how I appreciate an intro that draws the player in quickly, and I can't think of many games that do this as well as Final Fantasy VII. The story begins in space, where the stars are quickly replaced by a green glow, and a woman appears in the void. The camera cuts to reveal that we're actually just in the back alley of a grimy-looking city, with the woman looking at some sort of leak from a pipe. The scene then transitions away, giving us an overview shot of the city, and the title card kicks in with the music. This quickly establishes the scope and setting of the game, as well as showing off the shiny new FMV cutscenes. Pushing even more than FF6 did, 7 quickly lets the player know that it's going for a much more modern dieselpunk setting, and it is a massive game. The camera then takes us to a train reaching its destination, with what looks to be a group departing and attacking the guards on standby. After a sick flip off the train, our box art protagonist appears, and the game begins. From the moment you hit New Game on the title screen, it takes about 2 minutes before the game gives you control, and before we even know our protagonist's name, we're thrown into a battle against some guards. There's no tutorial yet, but the game gives you some weak enemies to test things out on and learn the basic mechanics for yourself. Following where the leader of the group disappeared to, the screen transitions, positioning the camera at an overhead shot now, teaching the player the way that the world functions and getting them accustomed to the new fixed camera angles. Speak to the group, and we learn a little bit about our protagonist, namely their history as an enemy soldier and their name, Cloud. Cloud shows little interest in the group or their ideals, claiming he's out of here once this mission is over, showing that he's just a gun for hire and not actually part of them. The group proceeds forward with the leader Barrett showing his distrust for Cloud over his occupational history. After proceeding through some more rooms and fights, we arrive at the reactor core. The group Avalanche are here to destroy the reactor, as the Shinra company is using it to drain the planet of its energy source, Mako. Cloud has some sort of weird vision, stopping him from arming the bomb, and an armored scorpion mech appears for a quick boss fight. Once defeated, they arm the bomb and have to make their escape from the facility before it goes off, giving the player a timer that persists even through combat encounters, giving a real sense of urgency to the fights. The reactor explodes, and we witness the scope of the destruction from the city view. The group splits up, planning to gather at the rendezvous point, and Cloud escapes to the streets, meeting the flower girl from the intro cutscene. After fighting off more security, Cloud makes his escape by hopping onto a running train, leaving behind the destruction and the panic that they had caused. Where Final Fantasy I gave you a small sandbox to play around in, learning the controls, the mechanics, and the story at your own pace, easing you into the experience, Final Fantasy VII decided to drop the player right into the thick of it, forcing them to learn on their own, and adding clarification later if they were still struggling. The excitement of the experience was the main goal here, and the developers wanted to minimize the amount of canned tutorials, pulling the player out and breaking the immersion. By the time the bombing mission's over, the player should know the basics of every main mechanic they're going to be interacting with throughout the game. The story starts pretty strongly as well. Having the conflict be a bunch of eco-terrorists fighting against a megacorporation allows the writing to exist in some moral gray areas. Yes, you naturally want to side with the protagonist group and help the planet, but the player doesn't know enough yet to justify the actions at this deadly scale. Learning more about all of this is a fantastic way to pull the player in. Cloud's coolness factor and his history with the Shinra Corporation make him an extremely interesting perspective to follow as everything unfolds. One of my major complaints with the Final Fantasy series as a whole is that most of the games tend to get worse as they go on, both from a story and a gameplay perspective. Final Fantasy VII is one of the few entries that I think only gets better as it goes on. I'll say it up front, I'm not a fan of the beginning of this game for its gameplay alone, namely the Midgar section. While the story is enticing, I find the combat to be too restrictive, as the materia system's faults are most apparent here. You don't get much materia, nor do you have many slots to equip them anyway, so your combat options are extremely limited, with most battles turning into simply mashing the basic attack over and over. Moving materia between party members gets pretty tedious, and your party gets switched around a decent amount in the opening hours. You pretty much have to be moving the materia because it's all you have, and you don't have enough to equip your backup characters unless you want to be underpowered. The overworld is also a point of contention for me. While the pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles look amazing, and they really capture the setting of what they were going for, they aren't always the easiest to maneuver. There are a handful of moments where it's not clear what the player can walk on or interact with, making it kind of annoying to move around. The game includes a mode that you can toggle on that shows where the player character is and any entrances or exits, and while this is helpful, it feels more like a band-aid on the bigger issue. Midgar is the worst for this, as the cramped environments, while thematically really cool, they just exacerbate these issues. However, once you leave Midgar, the game completely changes. The environments open up and feel more polished, being much clearer overall. The materia system really begins to expand at this point and come into its own, as you have much more materia overall, and the ones you already had should be decently leveled by this point, meaning you can really customize and play with each party member however you want. It's at this point that Final Fantasy VII really starts to feel like a Final Fantasy game. There are still some persistent issues that the game never seems to quite figure out. With the new dynamic battles, the camera is constantly moving, attempting to make the fight seem more intense, which it does achieve, but it brings a major issue with it. For some reason, target selection is not tied to selecting the enemy's name off a list, but rather, it's their relative position to the camera. So many times, you'll attempt to select a target for an attack or spell, but end up picking the wrong one because the camera changed at the last second and you made the mistake of moving the cursor at that moment. Most of the time, this isn't really that big of a deal, but when you need to make quick selections in a very time-sensitive manner, it really starts to sour the experience. I didn't know where to put this in the video, so I'm just going to mention it here, but I think the visuals of this game are absolutely wonderful. The backgrounds look fantastic, and the character models, while kind of clunky, have a ton of charm to them. I especially like the chibi-style overworld models, as they look like little action figures. Even the walk cycles for each character are different, and give you a little bit of their personality just from looking at them on screen. The enemy designs in this game are also super cool, with way more variety than the previous entries. And yeah, the FMVs have aged the worst out of anything, as any close-up of a character looks pretty bad, but any scenery shot looks pretty good in my opinion. I know a lot of people don't like how this game looks anymore, but for me, it works perfectly. I think the biggest improvement that Final Fantasy VII made over its predecessors is the character writing. As I'd mentioned previously, 6 had some solid characters, but most didn't have much depth or relevance beyond their introduction. 7 sought to fix this issue, and I'd say it mostly achieved that goal. There's a lot of text and dialogue in this game, and most scenarios are written with unique flavor text from who you choose to bring along. The group constantly stops to discuss the current situation and what they should do next, and reducing the total party member count to 9 gives the writers a lot more flexibility in incorporating your team in a multitude of ways. The group feels much more like a group in this game than any previous entry. Obviously, characters like Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith get a lot more focus in the overall plot than the rest, but the gap is a lot smaller than before. Some of the most fun I had in this game was just walking around and interacting with stuff to see what the party would have to say. The weak links of the team, however, are once again the optional members Vincent and Yuffie. They rarely get to interact with the group during meetings and have very little story relevance. Yuffie is given some spotlight with her optional Wutai questline being a pretty substantial part of the game, but Vincent gets a 5-minute nothing quest and kinda sucks as a party member as a whole, so I personally never bothered bringing him along for anything. For the characters that do matter though, they really are incredibly fleshed out. Seeing the progression of the characters as the story unfolds really elevates them from the simple, one-note members of the previous games. Barret and Cloud, who start off hating each other and arguing all the time, slowly warm up and become very close friends, and watching it develop is genuinely heartwarming. Cloud alone goes through major changes over the course of the game, and he's not just the edgy, cool, depressed guy that every single piece of media after this game thinks he is.
What you doing?
I'll get him. This time, we settle it. Me and the one who embodies all the darkness in me. I'll get him.
I thought you looked kinda different, Cloud.
I absolutely love the cast of this game, and it's hard for me to find a single thing that I dislike about any of them. This isn't just about the main characters either. FF7 has one of the strongest supporting casts I've seen in a game ever. From the Shinra Corporation heads Rufus, Heidegger, Scarlet, and the Mustard Guy, to Professor Hojo, to the Turks, to the Avalanche crew, this game gives its minor players so many little things that add to the charm. One of my favorite instances of this is during the Wutai side quest, where you find the Turks eating at a local restaurant. Elena, the newbie of the group who wants to prove herself, prepares for a fight to capture you. Reno, however, stops her from starting a scene since the group is on vacation. They're off the clock, so they are not working. Little moments like this add a ton to the overall experience and make the world feel that much more alive.
Dun 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 dun.
The main antagonist, Sephiroth, really lives up to his popularity. I think he checks off for me pretty much every box on what makes an effective villain. From near the start of the game, he's mentioned constantly, and is somehow almost always related to the events that's happening. Before even his first actual appearance, the game has built him up to be this huge deal. So when he finally does appear, it hits heavy and really sets in how bad the situation is. He keeps this foreboding aura throughout the entire run of the story, and he frequently appears in some shape or form to remind you that he's always one step ahead. While avoiding spoiler territory, I want to highlight Sephiroth's involvement with the main cast, namely Cloud and Tifa, and their relation to the Nibelheim incident. Before this, the main villains of the Final Fantasy series had been bad guy, bad guy, bad guy then an evil monster, bad guy who's actually your brother then an evil monster, bad guy who's actually a tree, and bad guy with cool thematic parallels and is also funny. None of the antagonists have any direct ties or history with the protagonists, with the exception of Golbez and Kefka, but even their involvement is very minimal. Sephiroth, however, is the main driving force behind not only the events of the game, but also the events in the party's lives that had led them to where they are now. This connection makes the emotional confrontations that much more effective, as there's history between these parties. I'll go ahead and say it right now. Even going forward, I think Sephiroth is the best villain in the entire Final Fantasy franchise. I know a lot of people like Kefka more, and Kefka's cool and all, but Sephiroth is just next level. Everything he does is awesome. I love the way this character's portrayed. Overall, Final Fantasy VII is a special game. There aren't many games like it, even within its own franchise, and it marked new heights, not only for the series, but for video games as a whole. The game is just a ton of fun, and I'm glad that I was wrong about it, and it is actually as good as everybody says it is. At this point, Squaresoft was on fire, and for my journey through the Final Fantasy games, it looks like they'll only keep this trajectory going as long as they don't make any major mistakes or completely drop the ball somewhere with... From its beginnings on the NES, Final Fantasy as a series has made its main objective to be to constantly reinvent itself. Though the core of each game tends to be pretty similar, and there are consistent elements, there's always some change to the gameplay or format that significantly alters the overall experience between each entry. These ideas are, for better or for worse, usually scrapped and replaced in the next title for yet another new system. This leads to some entries being quite divisive, as what worked for some people in one title may not work for others, nor is it representative of the rest of the franchise. Final Fantasy VIII is one of those entries. For some people, this is the pinnacle of the series and one of, if not the best JRPGs of all time. For others, this game is a messy, annoying, and tedious waste of time. I am one of those people. For this game, I played the remastered version on PC, mostly just out of convenience, as it already had convenient things like speed-ups and other game boosts built in. I know some people don't really like this version, but it's the best overall, just for my sake. Gameplay in FF8, at its core, changes very little from what the previous games had established, especially 7. The ATB meter, limit breaks, 3-person parties, character-specific classes, it's all here. By this point, the developers had a working formula and they kept with it. If you played any of the previous 4 installments, you already know the basics of what's going on in Final Fantasy VIII. The big addition to this game is the junction system, and it's a little convoluted, so I'll do my best to explain it here in words. The system begins by using summons, which are now called Guardian Forces. Along with being just a big attack or buff like they used to be, they now serve the additional purpose of being equipment. When you equip a summon, you unlock slots on your character that allows you to upgrade and manipulate the corresponding stat or resistances. To use these upgrades, you need to equip magic spell cards to the stats, which are now a replenishable finite resource. Different spells have different stats that they affect in different ways, so there's a ton of variations and builds that can be made for each character. To gather magic cards for equipment, you have to use the new Draw ability either on a draw spot that you can find in the overworld, or in combat on an enemy. This gives a set number of cards from the draw and adds them to your inventory. In some cases, you can also draw new summons from opponents, expanding your available junctions and giving your characters more options to have stats opened up and make them stronger. This may all sound really confusing, and the game recognizes this, as it has some pretty extensive tutorials attempting to explain it, and I'll admit, it took me a while to really understand the junction system the first time I played this, but it makes much more sense once you get your hands on it and you get to start messing around and testing things. Unfortunately, understanding the system doesn't necessarily mean that I liked it. With junctioning being your main method of progression, this means that you'll need magic cards, and a lot of them. The more of a spell card you're carrying, the greater the stat effect when junctioned, and at 100 card capacity for 50 different spells in the game, for each character, and you get on average 1 to 5 cards per draw.
That's almost 100. No, really, that's almost 100.
You're going to be drawing for a large portion of your playtime. I found this extremely boring even while using speed-ups, so I can't even imagine how much I would dislike it on the original PlayStation version at normal speeds. I like my leveling to feel pretty natural. I prefer to minimize the amount of dedicated grinding, and I'd rather progress through actions that I was going to complete anyway. When I play a turn-based game, I'd like to level my characters through any encounters I have as I march through the story and the occasional side quest, and provided I don't skip too many fights, I should be naturally scaling with the game and meeting the requirements for the next harder required sections with minimal additional work. The junction system does not lend itself to this at all. Yes, you still progress through enemy encounters, but now you have to halt in the middle of the battle and spend a ridiculous amount of time per fight every instance there's a new spell to draw or you have a new character. Realistically, you could draw a few cards and move on, but you don't know when that spell will appear again, as every enemy has their own set spells that you can draw from. So it's in your best interest to grab as many as you can while it's available, oftentimes just filling to the top. This is also made worse by the fact that magics are finite, so if you use a spell, you're additionally lowering your own stats, so it's vital that you draw as much as you can, whenever you can. You can use spells straight from a draw without consuming any cards of your own, but that limits your magic options to only what the enemy has available on them. To help mitigate this issue, the game does include a regular experience system like the previous entries. Kill enemies, get experience points, level up, and improve your baseline stats, same as always. The problem with this is that the game scales to your level. As you gain XP and level up, enemies will also level up and become stronger. This scaling isn't one-to-one, however, as it gets progressively more difficult since the enemies scale much faster than you do. At level 5, a party can take on a level 5 enemy fairly easily, but a level 30 party will generally tend to struggle with a level 30 enemy unless they have top level junctions. It also doesn't help that the stat benefits you get from leveling are pretty minuscule, meaning that this system kind of only exists solely to increase difficulty without telling the player. Instead of you getting stronger and meeting the requirements of the game is just getting stronger to punish you for getting stronger. Knowing all this, the player's options become extremely limited despite the seemingly open nature of the junction system. The gameplay loop very quickly becomes find an enemy with a new magic to draw and repeat for as long as possible, as you never know when that spell will show up again, and run away because if you attack the enemy and kill them, you'll gain XP leveling up, and you'll only make the game more difficult for yourself later. Now, some people might say that you don't necessarily have to avoid leveling if you don't want to. That's true, you can do whatever you want. If you want to make the game harder, go right ahead. That's all in your power. However, even the game itself incentivizes this playstyle, as nearly every single encounter that you're required to do and kill the opponent rewards the player with no experience points and only AP for upgrading junctions. The game wants you to avoid combat and instead just draw and run on repeat for 50 hours as its dev-intended experience. The only other major point to the gameplay is that, with the exception of the attack and limit breaks, you can customize the commands you have equipped freely. You're limited to 3 choices, but there are a ton of options that you can get from the character's junctioned Guardian Force. I like this in theory, but your command options also include things like items, magic, and summoning. Basic functions of a turn-based game and the entire franchise at this point. Meaning you have to give up on one of these if you want to utilize literally any other options. This also includes the draw command, the main mechanic of the game, and as we've established earlier, using the magic command depletes your magic card count and lowers stats, so it's probably best to just drop that, but your 3 slots are still likely to be taken by items, draw, and Guardian Force, leaving really no room for anything else unless you want to drop an extremely significant portion of a character's general moveset. In Final Fantasy VII, if you equipped a command materia, the command was added in addition to your pre-existing moveset. In 8, commands are more of a nuisance than anything, further bringing down the actual level of customization available as you limit the things that you have. Outside of that, there really isn't much going on gameplay-wise in Final Fantasy VIII. Minigames have all but been removed besides the new card game Triple Triad, and there's not much else available to do. Speaking of Triple Triad, I'd be foolish to not mention it at least briefly here, seeing that it's arguably more popular than the base game itself. You and your opponent take turns placing cards on a grid, and they all have 4 numbers on them. If your adjacent number is higher, you take the opponent's card, but they could also take it right back next turn with another card. The player with the most cards at the end wins. While it is entirely optional, it can make for a pretty fun break from the core gameplay, and I see why people like it so much. Unfortunately, I'm not a fan of Triple Triad. I don't necessarily dislike it at all, but it really doesn't do much for me. I do think it's pretty funny how you can challenge pretty much any NPC in the game, regardless of how dire the situation may be in the story. You can just pull out a deck of cards and go to town. It's pretty funny. I'll be entirely frank, I had next to no fun playing this game at all. The systems in place at best feel like a jumbled mess that don't really work together, and at worst, actively go against the main gameplay loop of what makes turn-based games fun for me in the first place. Final Fantasy VIII was a slog for me to play, but I can respect the attempt at keeping tradition and once again trying to come up with a new, innovative system to keep the series fresh. I've played plenty of games that had mediocre to bad gameplay that I still look back on pretty fondly because the story and the writing carried the experience for me. Maybe Final Fantasy VIII is one of those games. I hate the story of Final Fantasy VIII. The game opens with a pretty mysterious cutscene, lots of flashing, cryptic imagery and text interlaced throughout a battle that the protagonist is facing. Clearly to show off the upgraded visuals and model quality from FF7, the characters in the scene here look a lot more realistic and much closer to the box art designs than the previous entry had. The fight ends with the two slashing each other across the face, and the scene cuts to our protagonist waking up in a medical ward, likely having lost the fight. We learn the two's names, Squall and Cypher, and that due to the clear tension and bad blood between them, their combat training for the military academy that they attend had gotten way out of hand. The doctor confirms his health, and a mysterious woman appears in the mirror, excited to see Squall again, though it seems he can't see her. Squall's instructor Kistis comes to pick him up and takes him back to class, though Squall acts really moody and put out the whole way there. You then have to read the tutorial section for the basics of the game, as even the developers know how complicated these new systems are to first-time players, so they want to get you in and acclimated as quickly as possible. Once you're done with your homework, you bump into the new transfer student Selphie and agree to give her a tour of the facility. Now that that's out of the way, you finally continue on your way to the field exam with Kistis, where she then explains the Guardian Force, or GF, and junction systems again, just in case you didn't understand it earlier. Onwards towards your exam, you encounter some random battles, testing the basics of the combat mechanics, and finally get to your destination and test them against Ifrit. After succeeding and a few more tutorials, the duo returns to the school called the Garden, and Squall has to prepare for the second half of his field exam. There's a bit more of the intro section to the game here, but I feel like that's a good enough cutoff point for our purposes for this discussion. This intro is really, really boring to me. I don't mind a slow burn. Some of my favorite games are really slow to start and take forever to get into. But Final Fantasy VIII really does nothing for me here. Look at FF7's intro. It's bombastic, flashy, has a little bit of mystery going on, and it very quickly gets the player acclimated to the controls and the general gameplay on their own terms. In contrast, FF8 takes almost 30 minutes before you even get into a battle, instead opting to make you study for the SAT because the junction system is so needlessly convoluted that it's near impossible to explain through gameplay alone, making these long tutorials a necessary evil. Even going beyond this segment, you don't really learn anything about the characters or the world in the intro, other than that Squall is moody and hates talking to people. You don't learn about the military academy really, or how it works, you just kind of are there. I was willing to give the game the benefit of the doubt at this point, kind of hoping it would pick up later and, the story would improve, but it never really does. Squall and his band of dunderheads pass their exam and become seeds, while Cypher fails and is removed from the plot for a while. At their inauguration party, Squall meets the conventional Japanese beauty standard woman who clearly likes him despite his terrible attitude and is only there for a self-insert scene, as they have a little dance. And then there's this really weird moment where Kistis flirts with him and it's never really relevant again or really brought up at all. I will give the game credit that within just a few hours of starting, they've introduced most of the main players in the story at this point. And I don't know enough about them to really care that much, but it's nice that they're brought in that early. I've played a lot of pretty bad games over the years, and I think I'm more willing than most people to overlook the faults of a game if there's other stuff that can carry the experience and kind of give it that little bit of charm. But unfortunately, FF8's plot has too many offending moments that just spoil everything for me. So many moments, in fact, that I can't reasonably go over just about everything without this video being 5 hours long, like every other terrible YouTube essayist who can't consolidate their thoughts whatsoever. So I'm gonna do like a quick rapid fire segment on things that suck or I hated about the story of Final Fantasy VIII. And here's your spoiler warning if you care, but honestly, I wouldn't recommend playing this game anyway. The story's bad, so here you go. The concept of the military school is pretty cool. I think it's a really interesting setting that you could do a lot with, but unfortunately the game almost never utilizes this setting in any meaningful way whatsoever. And the plot just kind of generally makes no sense and things just kind of happen as a whole. Squall does nothing the entire game. Stuff just kind of gets forced onto him and it gets really, really annoying. There's barely any moments in the game where Squall wants to do something and pushes the plot forward with his actions. It's always he's following the actions of the plot and is just there. Squall and the aforementioned Japanese beauty standard woman Renoa have a terrible love story and it makes no sense, nor does it really ever be believable that it would happen. Squall spends the vast majority of the game being forced to like Renoa by the rest of the cast, as they keep pushing them together and talking about how cute they are as a couple. And Squall resents it. He gets legitimately angry at the party on multiple occasions because of this. Until the end of the game where, for some reason, he just completely flips that on its head, and the only motivation he has is Renoa. He doesn't care about anything else. There's not really a scene or a moment where, they bond or come to some realization. He just kind of likes her now because the plot says he does. Nothing actually builds their relationship. Junctions causing memory loss for every main party member is one of the worst and stupidest plot devices I've ever seen in a game. It doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things because you can take it out and the plot doesn't change at all. It's simply there just to have like a cool, whoa, shock moment for the player, but it's really not interesting and it just comes off as contrived. The main cast for this game just kind of sucks. I don't like them at all. Having 6 required characters means that, for the most part in any story segment, every character is involved in some way, shape, or form. This is a nice change from the previous games, where optional characters often ended up being left behind during narrative segments. Unfortunately, just because they're there and talking doesn't mean that they're integrated well. The game is constantly splitting your group into 2 parties, and that's nice because it gives time to develop narratively for each individual character. But switching junctions on your party takes a ton of time, and it's not even worth it because the characters don't develop at all. There's nothing that happens in these split party segments where the characters develop or change or have any sort of new interactions. The entire cast is extremely one note, and they lack any real depth besides maybe Squall. They're more like caricatures than people. You know next to nothing about them for the entire run of the game. The information you got from them from their introduction is pretty much what you will know about them when the credits roll. There's nothing additional. It feels like they're trying to be quirky and funny, but there's no chemistry between these characters whatsoever, so it just comes off as annoying. The cowboy sniper Irvine shows up near the end of Disc 1, and by the end there, he has next to no character besides the sniper guy womanizer character. And then he has the terrible, terrible backstory reveal where all the characters grew up in the same orphanage, but they all forgot because they just did because of junctions. And Irvine doesn't change at all. It actually doesn't change anything. He's still the same character and is just there. Multiple points throughout the story have the party randomly just passing out and viewing scenes from the past through the eyes of some soldiers led by a guy named Laguna. This could be a pretty cool piece of storytelling. However, anything to do with Laguna is really stupid and it's annoying. It's supposed to be kind of cheeky and funny while also giving you a little hints about the main plot and everything, but it's never funny and it's never that interesting and it doesn't really develop the plot at all. Laguna's friends Kairos and Ward are actually irrelevant. They don't serve any purpose to this game besides giving Laguna party members. Squall's party, when they wake up from these moments, just kind of completely ignore the flashbacks multiple times and nothing changes. They just push it in the back of their minds, not acting like them all having the same dream at the same time and they witness the same events is like a big deal. Like that doesn't matter to them. They don't care. And honestly, I don't blame them for not caring because none of the Laguna segments actually matter in this story. You can take them out and almost nothing is significantly changed. You get a little bit of information about the girl from the beginning cutscene, but you can take that out and nothing changes. You can find that in some other spot. The rival character Cypher is just terrible. He's not interesting at all. He hates Squall for some reason. Like, they grew up in the same orphanage, just like everybody else for some reason. And he's like a bully, but you don't know why, he just is. He barely shows up in the game, and every single fight you have with him is pitifully easy, despite him narratively being like, I'm so much better than you, and Squall and the rest of them are like, oh no, it's Cypher, he's so tough, but the game doesn't show that in gameplay. Every single character from this game, especially Cypher and his crew, Fujin and Raijin, are way more entertaining in Kingdom Hearts because, at least in Kingdom Hearts, it's really funny how stupid they are. In this game, they're just kind of stupid and nothing else.
Yeah, you're the only ones who would take it, you know?
That was undeniable proof that we totally owned you, lamers. Good afternoon, slackers. What are you doing out here?
What do you care?
I don't. Tell me anyway. Now you're talking. Destin. In that case, let's be friends. I don't feel like cooperating with Destin.
When have you ever cooperated with anything?
So many things just happen in the story in this game, and you as the player are just supposed to sit there and accept it. And like I said earlier, individually, I may be able to overlook some of these issues, but the sheer volume here makes it extremely hard to forgive. Maybe they'll bring it back with a strong villain who can help carry the narrative, though. Final Fantasy has historically had some pretty cool villains, and Sephiroth from the previous game is one of my favorite antagonists in a game, period. So I'll hold out for that. Okay, I'm done holding out because Ultimisia is one of the dumbest and worst villains ever. She's a witch from the future who uses her powers to possess a witch from the past to give herself time travel powers in the future, but not full time travel powers because she needs to possess a different witch who has better time travel powers for something, and for some reason she can't possess that witch to begin with. I don't know why. It's just, that's kind of the way it is. Her main goal is to compress time in on itself because she just wants to do that for some reason. She's evil. I don't know what it even means. She just says she wants to do it. What that actually entails, other than like killing everybody, I don't know. I don't know what that's going to do to her, but you know, the game just tells you that's what she's going to do, so you just have to sit there and accept it. The worst part is she doesn't even get mentioned until disc 3 of the game, and it doesn't even really matter because the vast majority of the game has nothing to do with her or her stupid time plot to begin with. The only time you actually see Ultimecia is during the final boss. Early on in the game, when the main villain was just the matron who was being possessed by Ultimecia, the writing had the opportunity to do some pretty interesting stuff, as Squall and his team had to fight against their former foster home mother from the orphanage they grew up in, and completely forgot about because junctioning makes you forget important stuff to that level. It uses this plot for a little bit, but then the witch leaves Adea's body, and you learn absolutely nothing about Ultimecia as a character after. She's just kind of there as an obstacle to fight. You don't know anything about her motives at all. I don't need my villains to always have some morally gray motives or be some sort of super deep introspective thought piece all the time. As you've seen with the previous games, I enjoy simple, even silly villains. I just want them to make sense in the context of their story, and Ultimecia doesn't do this, ever. There isn't a single moment in this game where I felt any motivation to want to beat her, because she's simply there just to be there. I really just don't like Final Fantasy VIII. It's a really tedious slog for me to get through, and sure, there are some things that I can speak positively about. Like I said earlier, the military academy setting is cool and offers a pretty unique perspective to tell the story from, and the FMVs are massively improved from FF7's, expanding the cinematic nature of these games even further. However, the vast majority of what this game has to offer frustrates me to no end. I can respect the attempt at making a brand new, never-been-done-before battle system, but it just falls flat in every way, and the writing does nothing to pick up the slack. I played this game twice for this video, and I genuinely tried to enjoy it each time. Maybe there was something I was missing, something I just didn't get about the game on the first time, so on my second playthrough I tried to really pay attention and really dive in, but it just never clicked. It was rough finishing this game, and honestly, I'll never play it again if I can help it. My journey through the Final Fantasy series had hit an all-time low here, and I was unsure if I even wanted to continue going through the entire franchise. Luckily, what came next would give me the second wind I needed to keep going with the second half of the series. After the massive success of 7 and 8, Squaresoft gained a lot of confidence in the Final Fantasy franchise, becoming more ambitious than ever, even going as far as announcing the next 3 mainline titles on the same day in the year 2000. Final Fantasy IX on the PlayStation, 10 for the soon-to-be-released PlayStation 2, and 11 being an MMORPG for the same system. There were clearly high expectations for the future possibilities of what the Final Fantasy name could expand to. When all was said and done, this risky announcement turned out to be a pretty huge success, with 10 being one of the best-selling entries in the franchise to date, and 11 being a fairly massive hit and still running to this day over 20 years later, despite diminished interest. These games are still talked about fondly and mentioned quite often when speaking about the highlights of the series. However, not everyone can share the spotlight, and it seemed that Final Fantasy IX seemed to slide on by. Sure, it sold decently, but it looked to be overshadowed by its brother entries. Going into this game, I knew next to nothing about it at all. People just don't seem to talk about this game as much anymore, and after the disaster of a time that I had with FF8, I can say that I was wary to see what the developers would come up with next. Luckily, I can say right now that they bounced back harder than ever with FF9. For this entry, I played the PC version with the Moguri mod installed. It completely overhauls the visuals, fixes a bunch of bugs, it includes a mod manager, and it's easily the best way to play the game at this point. I'm including a link in the description for the mod pack, and trust me, if you can play it with this, do it. Final Fantasy IX takes a bit of a back-to-basics approach in its overall design philosophy. Gone are the more modern and futuristic settings of 7 and 8, and returning is the classic fantasy setting full of knights and magic that the previous entries had had. Thankfully, they once again kept tradition and dumped everything of the previous entry's main gameplay mechanic, so no more of FF8's junctions, which is perfectly fine by me because I never want to see them again. They even returned to a party size of 4 active members, the correct and optimal number for every turn-based RPG, which should never be messed with because it's perfect in every way. The big change this time is how you gain abilities. Equipment, like weapons and armor, now serve the additional purpose of giving your characters their abilities. If a piece of equipment has an ability a character can use, put it on them, and as long as they have it equipped, they now have access to that ability, whether it's a spell or some sort of passive enhancement. This also means that the inverse is true, in that if you remove the equipment, you'll lose the associated abilities. If you complete battles with a piece of equipment on, you'll gain AP. Earn enough AP, and the abilities become a permanent part of that character's moveset, even while unequipped. This doesn't mean that you can use every ability simultaneously, however. Spells are permanent, but passive abilities have a cost, forcing you to budget which skills to take and which to give up, increasing the limit as you level up. This system is a ton of fun, and it adds a lot of customization to how you build your team. Say you get a new piece of armor that has a higher defensive stat, but you haven't finished learning all the abilities from your current equipment. Do you swap it out for the increased stats in the upcoming encounters, or do you keep grinding until you finish getting the available abilities? Say you run into enemies that deal status effects or debuffs. Do you keep your chosen abilities and brute force your way through it, or do you take the time to swap out an ability from your party to give them immunity? While the decisions are never really that impactful on the overall experience, it does add an extra layer of player choice in how they choose to go about the game. I spent a lot of time just messing around in the menus trying to decide what setup I wanted to mess with, and I loved every second of it. It feels so rewarding every moment.
Yo, fire! Oh, that's what he's saying, bro. Like, yo, this is peak.
As much fun as this system is, it would be ruined if it was your sole method of progression. Luckily, FF9 returns to the standard XP leveling system of the previous entries. Not only will your stats improve, letting you reach the challenge of the game naturally, you'll also increase your ability equipment cost, allowing for bigger and better builds and making the gameplay loop synergy stronger. While these systems might not be as in-depth or as free as something like the materia or job systems, I still think it's extremely fun and I really enjoy messing around with them. It's a pure dopamine rush seeing the abilities get checked off the list and watching your moveset grow. Other than that, there really isn't a ton to talk about with the gameplay of Final Fantasy IX. Combat is really just way too slow in general, especially in the beginning, but any modern port of the game has speed-ups built in, so that issue's kind of been dealt with. Limit breaks have been replaced with a new system called Trance, which is a super mode for each character that buffs their stats and abilities, and I like this change. I think it's a really cool way to go about some comeback mechanic, but the problem is you can't activate Trance manually like you could with a limit break. Once the transmitter's full, it will automatically activate regardless of whether or not you want to use it in the current scenario. This means that 95% of the time, you'll only get to use Trance in random encounters with trash mobs, not boss fights, like, where you'd actually want to utilize a skill like this. There's a new card game called Tetramaster, which kind of plays like Triple Triad, if Triple Triad didn't make any sense whatsoever. Seriously, I've played a decent amount of Tetramaster and I still don't understand it in the slightest. I'll just put down cards and they'll lose, and then I'll reset and put down the same cards in the same position against the same opponent cards, and it will randomly win for some reason. I really don't get it, and I'm glad it's optional, so I don't have to do like any of it. And while there aren't mini games like FF7 had, there are at least little breaks from the core gameplay in what I'd like to call optional micro games. It's a fun little way to slow the pace down if you want to, and take a break from the main story. Except Chocobo Hot and Cold. I hate Chocobo Hot and Cold so much. I'm sick of that game. I've played so many hours of it. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it.
Excuse me, what the actual fuck are you doing in my house?
Like I mentioned earlier, this game takes a back to basics approach, so if you've played any of the previous Final Fantasies 1 through 6, you kinda already get the general vibe of FF9. The story of Final Fantasy IX is a bit of a slow burn. The game opens with a pretty impressive FMV of a ship being thrown about in a dangerous storm, quickly cutting to a princess waking from the dream she was having. After some wide panning shots showing off the kingdom and the world, we move to a floating airship where, inside, we find our Monkey Man protagonist, Zidane. His friends come barging in, and the group gets attacked by some stupid-looking dragon thing, giving the player their first tutorial battle. Beat it up enough, and it turns out it was actually just their boss messing around with them for no reason. Thus begins their mission debriefing. The group here is known as Tantalus, a wandering band of thieves, and their current mission is to put on a fake production of a play, and during the commotion, kidnap Princess Garnet of Alexandria. Now the perspective changes once again, down to a little black mage named Vivi as he makes his way up to the castle to go watch the show. Unfortunately, Vivi's ticket gets swapped with a fake, and he needs to find a new way in. Obviously, the logical conclusion here is to sell himself into slavery.
What?
And Vivi and his new rat kid master sneak their way into the castle and find a spot amongst the crowd. The show begins, and Zidane's party use the action to sneak off and steal some guards' equipment to search for the princess. Zidane quickly bumps into a hooded Princess Garnet, who seems to already be on the run from something. It's revealed that Garnet ran away on her own, taking the royal pendant with her, and the queen sends Knight Captain Steiner to search for the princess. Steiner finds the princess being chased by Zidane, where she swings from tower to tower to escape. But after being cornered and realizing the Tantalus crew's objective, Garnet requests Zidane to kidnap her of her own volition, and the two run from Steiner, where all three eventually accidentally make their way onto the play stage. Meanwhile, Vivi and the Rat Kid get caught by guards for sneaking in, and are chased onto the stage as well, where everyone tries to escape on the Tantalus ship. The Alexandrian forces attempt to stop this kidnapping, and the Tantalus crew crashes down in the neighboring forest. After some deliberation, Zidane leaves the Tantalus and joins Garnet on her quest, with Steiner and Vivi tagging along. This is about where I'd say the intro ends and the story really begins. The intro doesn't set up a ton as far as the plot or major conflict goes, but it does a lot to establish the initial party and their personalities. The world feels so alive and full right from the get-go. There's so many NPCs to interact with, and even the side characters get developed pretty early on. This isn't the last time you'll see of them either, as characters like the Tantalus crew or the Knights of Alexandria are recurring to the main story and stay relevant throughout pretty much the entire game. This isn't to say that the intro doesn't set up any story, however. The twist that Princess Garnet wants to be kidnapped completely independently of Tantalus' plan adds a bit of mystery and intrigue. What's so dire that she feels the need to escape from her cushy lifestyle to go with a bunch of thieves from the slums? What involvement will Vivi have? He kinda just ends up with the group entirely accidentally, so where is his story going? Will he escape from his self-inflicted slavery? Who knows? Where FF8 feels like the characters were written around the story, 9 feels like the story was written around the characters. I love this approach, as it gives the story time to develop and lets you settle into the world before things get too hectic. It's a nice contrast to FF7's approach, while still being effective at pulling the player in its own way. Final Fantasy IX is a character-driven game, so you better hope you like them. Seriously, the plot moves at a snail's pace, sprinkling details here and there, but ultimately not really coming together until about halfway through the game. Luckily, I love the cast of this game, and had no issues with this format at all. While the game suffers from the same issues of unbalanced character spotlight that has always plagued Final Fantasy, with the exception of one character, it's really not too bad here. Zidane is a phenomenal protagonist, and his goofy interactions with everyone is really fun to watch, especially his budding romantic relationship with Garnet, and his entire motivation for 80% of the game being just trying to get into her pants.
I need some bitches. Okay. I need some bitches. I need some bitches. I need some bitches. I need some ratchets. I need some ratchets. I need some ratchets. Okay. I need some ratchets.
Garnet, or her alias Dagger, starts to see her naivety and how much bigger and different the world is than she thought it was while cooped up in the castle. Watching her learn street smarts and attempt to blend into lower class society is hilarious. Steiner is a man torn between his duty to his kingdom and his own morals, being forced to choose between the two on multiple occasions. Vivi, a nervous young boy, gains the confidence to search out the circumstances of his birth and find the meaning to his existence. He's also the best character in the game, and if you don't like Vivi, I don't like you. Watching this little dude fall over and over is one of the best recurring jokes ever, and it never fails to put a smile on my face.
Oh, nigga! My ears burn!
The other party members, while not as fleshed out, still have their time to develop and continue to contribute to the group even after their initial arc is over. Freya acts as a good level-headed counterbalance to the group, and Aiko does a lot to push Dagger's development forward. The only real dud of the cast is Amarant, who kinda just shows up, is obsessed with Zidane for some reason, joins your team, and that's kinda it for the whole game. It's honestly kind of a waste of a character slot, is what I would say if I was a stupid idiot. Final Fantasy IX remedies the issue of its character relevance with the inclusion of the new active time events system. At certain points in the story, you'll get a notification to view some optional scenes, usually showing what the other party members are doing at that moment. I adore these moments, as they add an additional layer of depth to the cast. Made it to a new city and the party got split up? Well, you get to witness what the characters do and existing on their own, outside of the perspective of the player-controlled character, usually being Zidane. Seeing how they react to the world around them develops their personalities and really makes up for some characters' lack of screen time in the main story. Amarant, while still obviously being the weakest link of the bunch, gets a fun friendship with Freya, and learning about why he's obsessed with Zidane is really cool, and it adds a lot to his character. These active time events aren't only for the core party members either. Side characters like the Tantalus crew or the Black Mages have plenty of moments on their own, entirely independent of the main party. These make the world feel so much more fleshed out and alive, like these characters aren't just mindless NPCs. My only real complaint with this system is that there's a lot of these events, and it's not as simple as just watching them all. Oftentimes, the game will provide you with multiple events at once, and you have to select the order in which you view them in. Unfortunately, there is a correct order they must be viewed, as sometimes there are hidden bonus events locked behind this section and are entirely missable. It's a massive pain trying to get this right, and I'm convinced it's near impossible without a guide deliberately telling you the correct order, as it's never even obvious that you missed one, and you often at times have to go to the next screen and back and forth just to get things to unlock properly. I like that they're optional, since you may want to skip them on repeat playthroughs, but I don't think making these events missable was a good idea, especially not hiding them. I'd wager that most of the complaints about the character's lack of depth in this game comes from this, as much of the development is located here behind these hidden scenes, which is a real shame because these events contain some of my favorite moments in the entire game. I honestly wish more games used a system like this. Long JRPGs would definitely benefit from this addition. The main antagonist of the game, Kuja, is a bit of a letdown. While he does appear for most of the game, he's pretty one-note and he's just kind of a generic evil guy, much like the earlier Final Fantasy villains. I wouldn't say he's bad at all. He serves his purpose as a villain and his motivations are clear and concise, but he doesn't really stand out either. After a great antagonist like Sephiroth, Kuja feels really bland in comparison. He lacks the sauce, that special spice that would push him amongst the greats. While I have issues with him, I will say his thematic elements are really cool when the story unfolds and you get to know more about the world. I generally just think I enjoy Kuja's purpose in the story more than his actual character. He's still a million times better than Ultimisia though. He's a real character, so that's cool. Being that this game is the final entry by series director Hironobu Sakaguchi and composer Nobuo Uematsu, the team had reflected upon the Final Fantasy franchise thus far, creating a sort of swan song to send off the creators. Sakaguchi had even been noted saying that 9 is his favorite entry, as it's the closest to his ideal view of what Final Fantasy should be.
I like 9, of course.
And I think I would agree. Final Fantasy IX is a game that scratches all the right itches for me. The cast of characters, the story, the world, the gameplay, all of it just clicks, creating an unforgettable experience that was just as good, if not better, on my second playthrough. While I may find some entries superior in certain areas, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts here, and 9 is probably my favorite entry to this point in the franchise. It may have been short, but I want to get it across that I adore this game. There's not much to talk about it as it's a very simple game, but I love everything about it, and I really do think that you should give it a try if given the opportunity. That finishes up the PlayStation era of the mainline Final Fantasy games. This period was interesting, as the series hit what I believe is both its highest highs and its lowest lows during this time. FF7 and 9 are some of my favorite games of all time, and even though I despise FF8, I do have to recognize its attempts at breaking new ground and attempting to innovate. The series had broken through in the West, mostly due to 7, and had become a household name and a must-have for all PlayStation owners. I know a lot of people haven't played these games nowadays, and with the new 7 remake trilogy, some people see these older titles as outdated or even straight up replaced, but I implore you to at least give these games a shot, as they really do have a charm unlike anything else. Join me next time as I begin to cover the PlayStation 2 era of the Final Fantasy franchise, where things start to get a little bizarre. If you stuck with me this long, I greatly appreciate it, and thank you for watching.
Come circle around and grow dear.